I think before I found your work, I would have said this, and I assume that other people would think this as well if they don't deal with it themselves, that migraine is a bad headache, period. It's just a
Right.
bad headache. And so as we're discussing like what a migraine is, we can also discuss what a migraine is not, because you're right, like there is so much confusion out there. And if there's no way to have us, before you came along, have a solid way to diagnose this, it would be, you're right, like terribly difficult to be able to tell somebody whether they have migraines or not.
It's actually quite impossible because if you don't have, so for example, I found a video, excuse me, the video is a news reporter and she had a migraine in the middle of a newscast and it became very famous. It's about 10, 12 years old. And she didn't appear to, I mean, I don't know if she had a pain or she didn't, we don't know that, but she was in the middle of a sentence reporting on TV live, making a report and said words that were absolutely incomprehensible. And she didn't know it. That was the most interesting part of it, that she had some difficulty uttering some words and she said some words backwards. She said some words that I don't even know what they were saying. There was no way to even guess what she was trying to say. And so then they pulled her off the air and they took her to the emergency thinking she had a stroke. And all she had was a migraine. We don't know if she had a headache or not, but this is a migraine. It's very different from anything else. Now, this is just one form of one kind of symptoms. So the symptoms of migraines will depend upon what part of the brain, the particular condition, which is what actually is the cause, affects the migraine. So it affects the brain. So in the brain, we have basically two completely separate hemispheres. And they work very differently. Like, for example, my speech, my ability to speak is controlled by a center called the Broca area, which is in the left side of the brain. And so if I can't speak, for example, like that news reporter couldn't speak, that's because this area is affected by this particular thing, which is the cause. And it's just on one side, and therefore it usually affects one side. And so that she couldn't speak was very specific because it affected her, not her mouth, but her ability to speak. But it can, for example, affect one area of your brain on the back where your visual area is, then you're going to get an aura, but the aura is going to be in the opposite eye of what area it is touching or affecting. And so all the symptoms, like, for example, hemiplegic migraines, their half a body may go offline completely or partially. Like I had a couple of hemiplegic sessions and not a lot. So there's a whole lot of discussions about, well, I am a hemiplegic migrainer, I am an aura migrainer, but that's not true. Just today, one of our longer time migraineurs said, I've never had an aura in my life. I had all kinds of other migraine symptoms. And 1 year into the protocol, I now have an aura. How is that possible? And it's because it's a different area of the brain. And so we have so many different symptoms that if you're just looking at the symptoms, you can't tell whether you have migraine or not. But note that I haven't even mentioned pain so far.
Right. So how does that play into things?
I'm sorry?
So how does that play into things, the pain itself?
Okay, so the pain itself is for those cases when the brain, okay, so I have to backtrack for this because so the brain faces itself or finds itself in a particular situation, and which is the cause. And just to state right up bluntly what it is, it's an electrolyte imbalance in the brain. So if you're looking at a brain cell, which is a neuron, it's not like a round cell like most other cells as we imagine, but it's a long cell and it's covered with layers of myelin, which are layers of cholesterol and fat. So our brain is mostly fat and cholesterol. So it's very important to have the right kind of fat and right kind of cholesterol to eat that. But it's in layers. It looks like little sausages. Like, you know how you get the breakfast sausages and they're connected, but so there's a sausage in another line, a sausage in another line. And so imagine this all through the particular longer part of the cell. And so where there is no cover, no myelin, there are areas that are called nodes of Remy. So these are empty, they're completely open to the environment. And on this spot, you're going to have thousands of little pores. And these little pores are going to be voltage gated channels and other kind of channels as well. But voltage gated channels are the ones that operate the electricity in the neurons. And so on one of these nodes of RMBA, I'm just going to say a number, say you have 100 voltage gated sodium channels. And so its job is to have all these channels open, sodium rushes into the cell, and that starts the electricity. This is called basically an action potential. And then as it started in that one spot, the rest of the cell knows nothing about this electricity starting at this spot. So then the electricity so kind of have to travel to the next opening, where you again have, say, 100 voltage gated sodium channels, where the sodium rushes in, and it sort of kind of picks up that electricity that was created in the first node of NVA's first spot, and picks it up and carries it to the next one, and then goes on and on and on. So the electricity sort of kind of moves through what is called the spike train in the brain. Now, if a neuron, for whatever reason, and we should talk about what the reason is, runs out of sodium in one of these spots, I don't know how many sodium channels would have to go down for it to not function, but an action potential is an all or nothing. So you either have one or you don't have one. There are failed action potentials where it may start and then it stops because it didn't reach the threshold at which it can generate an electric power. And if you don't have enough to generate the electricity, then the electricity coming down from the other parts of the neuron all the way through reaches this one spot where there is not enough sodium to pick it up. The cell stops having the voltage. And so it then can communicate, because the cells communicate by the voltage, then is kicking out the neuropeptides, the little packets of neurotransmitters that then the next cell can pick up and it receives the message. So this is the function of our brain cells. And if for whatever reason this function stops, then that's trouble. And if the brain has a process by which it can fix this. So there is what's called a cortical spreading depression, which is very complicated. I don't want to get deeply into it, but what it is similar to like when you have a heart attack person and the paramedics come and put the machine on to start the voltage. So in the brain is a similar system, but it's built in within the brain, and it will create its own voltage current. It will send an electrical current all through the brain, which is called a cortical spreading depression. And it's visible if you're watching it with the proper equipment, functional magnetic resonance imaging or other kind of scanning. You actually can see, and there are some videos on YouTube on this, the cortical spreading depression. And so it depolarizes the entire brain. And it goes by about 2.5 to 5 millimeters per minute. So it's a slow process. It's not like the electricity in your power cord when you plug it into the outlet. It's very slow because it's organically created electricity rather than just the electrons hopping and going. And so it has to be recreated everywhere. But what it does, it sends basically a current all the way through the brain. It's a large current to sort of activate, like wake up, sort of kind of shake it, wake up. And if it was successful in activating it such that suddenly, in our blood, we have sodium, potassium, glucose, everything else continuously moving. And so every heartbeat, our blood quality and osmolality of these electrolytes changes. And so if this sudden electrical current was able to reset the brain such that suddenly sodium appears where there wasn't before, so the electricity can be started, then all you're going to have is this spreading depression, which can manifest as an aura for some people in some conditions. It is visible as an aura, but it happens in everyone's who has migraine, in every migraine brain, whether you see the aura or not. And by now we know that most people see some form of visual disturbance. It may not be the professional official aura, which looks really like the lights in the aurora borealis, or it could be just ragged lines. They could be dust, it could be fireworks, it could be just a flashlight, equivalent flashing, whatever it is, it's just a disturbance. And so the brain can fix itself. So in this case, you may have a lot of symptoms, but you may not have the pain, because the pain part is when the brain is unable to fix this electrolyte imbalance. And so that's when things break down, because at that point, it's like an emergency signal that's going on. And that initiates a cascade, which I call the tri-migraine complex. And that cascade then starts the pain.